Welcome to another episode of Peers Over Beers, your favorite digital and social evangelist podcast with your industry veteran hosts, Chris Detzel. This podcast starts now.
All right, here we go. So welcome to another Peers Over Beers. My name is Chris Detzel, and today we do have a special guest, Rich Millington. Rich, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I think everybody knows who you are, by the way.
I doubt that, but I'm flattered. Hi, everyone. I'm Rich. I'm the founder of a consultancy called Feverbee. And I think maybe what makes us unique is that we're very much at the intersection of the psychology and the technology and the strategy that makes a community work. So a lot of our work is really getting those things aligned and taking great companies and helping them build amazing online and offline communities of customers, fans, employees, all those great and wonderful things.
Yeah, you're right. You've been doing this a really long time, Rich, and no, you have. So when I first started kind of building online communities or being part of communities, I was part of a company called, well, sort of kind of where it started for me, but a company called metroforce.com, and the guy by the name of a guy by the name of Nick. His last name, he's going to kill me. I'll tag him on a LinkedIn post. But
Emmett, right? Nick Emmett.
Nick Emmett. Yes, Nick Emmett. We're Facebook friends, and so he's the one that introduced me to you years and years ago, and ever since I've been following, Feverbee community, and then we've met once or twice. One was a Higher Logic super forum a few years ago, and then here we are today. And of course, I've been following your stuff for a long time, so I appreciate you getting on and stuff like that. I mean, I love how you're so bold and you just kind of tell it how it is. And then the other piece I really like is that how data focused you are and ROI kind of focused, for communities, because I think it's hard to do, to be honest, but I think it's very important, and you show a lot of really cool stuff. So why don't we go ahead and get in it? So you just went to Israel, I don't know, a week or two ago, and would love to know more about that trip. How was it? What'd you talk about? And let us know.
Yeah, it was a really exciting trip. So I've been to Israel a couple of times now. And what's really interesting in Israel compared to any of us I've been to, like, there's times when I go to San Francisco and I'm like, this is the epicenter of community, all the people here, all the companies here. But when I think about it, I think it's the epicenter of community technology. And it's the epicenter of like a very specific kind of community and environment. When I go to Israel, and I was in Jerusalem most of the time this time, the natural community vibe is incredible. Like I was at the Community Forward retreat, which was amazing, an amazing organization. Really do look them up. And I was invited to speak at that event, but just how naturally community oriented the people I was meeting there were was just incredible. Like, in the community space, everyone gets along, but, sometimes different people compete with others. And so you can't always be as open and frank as you want to be. In Israel, I don't know if it's just what I experienced, but everyone is so open. Everyone is so sharing everything. Everyone is like inviting their competitors and sharing their advice with their competitors. So everyone wins. It's such an amazing experience. And I'm so lucky and grateful that I get to speak at that kind of event. So that's what I was doing there. And I think, by the way, that Jerusalem, I mean, I'm not going to get into a political discussion, but it's such a phenomenal place to visit.
Yeah.
Like, everyone should do a guided tour of Jerusalem. I'll give you the name of someone that I think is fantastic.
That's good.
But it's such a phenomenal place to visit. I really recommend that. If you get a chance to go, you should go.
Yeah. So my previous company was, worked at a cybersecurity company called Imperva, built their community. And I went to, I didn't get to go to Jerusalem, but I went to Tel Aviv a couple times, and just, I loved Israelis and just building relationships with them, and, talk about blunt people. They're very blunt, but I love it, so you're right. A great community there. And it's interesting because I'm starting to see more communities built out of Jerusalem, from a technology side, and maybe it's more of the cybersecurity piece. And maybe I'm just now noticing just because I was part of that. So
I would say over the last couple of years, around 20% of our work is there.
Okay.
I don't think it will get bigger than that, just because there's companies there that are like have better relationships and connections and all that. But like, Yeah, about 20% of our work is there. And that's quite interesting compared to like the size of Israel compared to other places where we work.
I agree, but it's a hub. It's specifically for, technology
For sure.
hub in a big way. And certainly cybersecurity is a huge pod there, right? So I agree with you. I love the Israelis, and I still have relationships from when I worked at Imperva that I talk to every week or sometimes every month,
Yeah.
So, as we kind of look at the last 2 years of, community, maybe it's 3, with, I don't know, it feels like whenever you start looking at the buzz on Twitter and social sites and things like that, that's just taken off. Now, I mean, you've been in the space for a while. I've been in it, for quite a while as well. And it does feel a little different. I don't know how you feel about it, but what do you think about, what's going on in the community space?
I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I was so worried for our sector because I felt, the economy is going to collapse. And then the first thing that often gets cut in a bad financial year is community. And I thought we were going to see, and that did happen in a couple of companies. We saw big layoffs, and I think we all know people that suffered from that.
That's right.
But I think what we saw as well was a surge of interest in community, especially support kind of communities where you want to connect people where you can't work from home anymore. So I think we have seen a surge. What I don't know yet is whether we're still riding that wave and it's going to drop a bit once, because it takes time to get a community up and running. Like if you began investing in like 2000, now's the time when you'll start to see the fruits of that effort. So I don't know if we're going to drop down a bit. I'm not one that thinks, community is the future of everything. There's other people that have that belief. But I think community plays an important role. I think we still haven't quite defined the value of community quite as precisely as perhaps we should. I think there's still confusion about what community is, but I think what we're seeing is that there's a whole spread of community efforts. Some are very mature, some are very young, and there's a lot more diversity in the types of communities that we're seeing. So I think we're seeing an increase in the level of interest. I think within the community scene or the community industry, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of like busy new events and activities. Five years ago, I felt I would have known like all of the big players in the scene. And now there's people doing amazing stuff. I'm like, this guy in India is like incredible. I've never heard this person before. And this person doing their own event and activity. And yeah, it's exciting. Like it's daunting at times, but it's exciting.
I want to unpack something, and I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but you said something that was kind of interesting around a lot of times when you start talking to some community people, people are like, oh my gosh, community is everything and everybody should do it and everybody should, and you kind of mentioned that you don't necessarily believe that, which I'm kind of on the same side, but unpack that a little bit about community should have its space or place in a sense. What does that mean? And what's place should that be? It probably depends, I assume, but love for you to unpack that a little.
I think there's some people, and I'm not like subtweeting or like trying to call out anyone here or anything. I think there's some people that want the world to be a certain way and they advocate for that, and that's perfectly fine. And I love the idea that community is like the central tenet behind how businesses organize themselves and how we sort ourselves in society. I love that idea. I generally, I think, coming from like, this is the way the world is today, and I see like community is a lot like many other things. It's one channel, one thing an organization can pursue, and there's upsides to it and there's downsides to it, and I think it plays a very specific role for some kinds of organizations. So I think for support, I think community is fantastic at answering those questions that aren't so broad. They can be resolved by a help center article, but they aren't so niche that they need a customer support rep. I think it's fantastic at solving those kinds of questions. And and if you're the kind of organization that gets a lot of those kinds of like in-between questions, as I call them, like, I think then a community is fantastic. I think community is fantastic in certain spaces, like the developer spaces, like it's incredible. Communities are so critically important in those kind of communities. I think for user groups, they're fantastic. I think for like small exclusive groups of peers, if you want to get all the top people in your sector together, I think community is fantastic. I think if you want to get people sharing the best expertise with one another, and you can find a structure where everyone builds their audience and feels a sense of influence and growth, community is fantastic. I am less sure that a community is going to take over the world. I'm, and it also, I mean, it depends how you define community. And I don't want to get into a semantic debate, but I think community plays a role, like the way that video does. Maybe video is one way of comparing it. Like videos can be fantastic; they can help your organization, but you wouldn't say that videos are the future of business. And I think community is kind of like that. Like it's really useful in certain situations, and we should be proud of that. If people want to advocate for more than that, that's great for them. I hope that they succeed, but the reality, I think it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's a good point. And you made me think, because within my organization, I'm very much obviously the advocate of all things community, because that's my role. That's what I do. And sometimes I do think I go overboard, because I'll think of these tactic kind of things. Oh my God, this tactic is going to drive some really cool engagement. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, but I get so excited in the moment. And then the next day I think I did this thing. And the next day I'm like, hey, maybe I shouldn't have done this thing, like it wasn't as great as I thought, or whatever. And I think you just have to kind of, tone yourself down a little bit and kind of look at reality and say, community is going to accomplish these things within my organization. I'm going to show the value of those things. And so I love that. That was really good. So another kind of thing that has been going around, and I saw a tweet the other day from you, but it was kind of this Web3 kind of stuff. I think it was probably 4 or 5 weeks ago when you tweeted about it, but I'm intrigued on, where does community play in Web3, and how do we get there from Web2 to 3? Does that make sense? Sort of. I mean,
yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. Yeah. I know that isn't the setup, but like, what is Web3?
Yeah. It's funny because whenever you tweeted that, I was like, what is Web3 anyway? So I did a Google search. So I was like, I don't know what it is. And apparently, from what I read, it's about people having their own space, right? So the Googles and the Microsofts and the people that own the web today basically are not necessarily going to own the web today. We're going to own the web, and we're going to have a piece of it. This cryptocurrency and whatever, all this other stuff is coming out, and it's going to change the world. And it's not that I don't think it won't change the world, because they're probably to some degree onto something. I agree with that there's probably is a surge of Web 3.0. There is maybe, but I don't know, 5 years from now, it all changes. What we think Web3 is today doesn't mean that's what Web3 is, several years from now. Nobody knew that, Google was going to be the main search for all time. I remember when Microsoft, it wasn't Bing then, it was I don't know, something. Whatever they had, was kind of the search thing. And now nobody really cares about what Bing is on. Everybody cares about what Google and YouTube, just Google taking over YouTube and video and just all the stuff Web 2.0 kind of brought. Nobody knew all that stuff was going to happen, right? So I think there's
jump.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me jump in. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like I want to jump in. So I think with Web3, it's a very broad term, and it can mean a variety of different things. And so I don't like discussing it like in a whole Web3. Sure, if I'm writing a tweet, I can't write. But when I think of Web3, I'm guessing that people think about the metaverse. I'm guessing they think about crypto and blockchains and maybe other stuff. But those are the things that occur most to me. I can't think what else. I'm sure I'm missing one. Blockchains, crypto, anything else?
I don't think so. Metaverse,
maybe there's more. So, and if I think about the community work I'm doing and that the community work I see most people doing, I don't see that turning into the metaverse because it increases the effort required to participate. The moment you have to put on a headset to participate, I think it makes it more difficult, more expensive, and I don't see it as an immediate. I might be wrong. I don't see it as an immediate change. Crypto, I mean, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert. I think there's some interesting stuff. There's some novel stuff that's going on. But again, I mean, think about this. If you were to think about social media as well, like, and for the lot of the work that you do and I do, it has actually changed community work in terms of having a hosted online community. Yeah, you might promote stuff on Twitter. You might have single sign on. But I wouldn't say there's being a profound change. There's just more competition for budgets, really. Like, I don't think it's had an insane change. And Web3, I think, is kind of the same. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think there's some very interesting stuff going on in communities filled with people of Web3 folks.
Yeah.
But they've got that kind of crossing the chasm issue, right? Where like you've got all this buzz here, you've got the mainstream here. Is it going to jump across? I don't know. I think if it is, it has to be a lot easier to use. I think I'm not too sure at the moment how a DAO works. I don't know how to like get tokens. I get the basic concept of it, but I don't even know where to go. And if I don't know it, then I mean, I'm not the most technologically savvy person, but like there's a lot of people behind me in that line. And so
that's me. Yeah.
I would also say like a lot of people haven't mastered like Web 2 yet. Like before anyone of us building a community outside of Web 3 today begins thinking about Web 3, we've got so many more things to work on. We've got to improve like the super user programs that we're developing. We've got to improve the data that we're collecting and analyzing about our communities. We've got to improve the user experience of the communities. Like if I were to do like a study on almost any community, and we do a lot of these, Web3 doesn't come up ever at all. No one even thinks about. I've never been on an interview with members, and I've done probably 1,000 of these over the last decade, where they're like, yeah, I wish I was walking along in a virtual world. I could engage with members. Like, no, they're not like, oh, I wish I had some distributed database with a ledger that couldn't be faked. I mean, like, it doesn't come up. What they want are like quicker responses, better responses, more access to staff, better navigation. And I feel like there's priorities here before we get excited about the shiny new thing. And the final thing I'll say, like being a bit snide here, is there seems to be the same people that are always promoting the new thing. Like they're always like these zeitgeisters, you know, where like this is the new thing, and you get a lot of attention by saying this is the future of everything, or this is the big new thing. But you never actually have to prove it, because by the time it's not, or it turns out to be so, like you move on to the next thing. And so, yeah, I like people that just knuckle down and do the work, to be honest, that improve their communities, you know, one step at a time, systematic about it. You know, they get the results, they show the results. Web3, I hope it works out well for them. It's not a priority for me at this time because I can't see a practical use for it.
Yeah.
I can't see a practical use for it for the kind of work that I'm doing and other people like me are doing.
I see it just as extremely immature at the moment, right? Like that whole concept and thinking, and potentially and it could easily mature in the next few years, 3, 4, 5 years, you know. But
for sure.
You know, and we'll kind of see. You know, something you mentioned the other day is, and again, it's a tweet, because I follow your stuff, because usually you put like 5 tweets into one, so it's actually really helpful. No, I mean, how do you get the word out? But you mentioned something about, you know, you're changing your mind about how I can't exactly remember the whole thing, but it was around the social piece and community managers and social people and how they engage, interact, and kind of the, you know, I would like to know a little bit more about that, because I've always heard this debate of, and it's even true today, like what I do on community is completely different than what our social media person does today, right? You know, and our social media person just pushes out content, you know, about the brand, you know, and there's people though that follow it, that might even tweet about it every now and then, but I don't see our social team that engaging, to be honest. You know, our people, you know, they're just wanting to push out content about the brand, and hopefully that changes, and maybe with an influence of community, I can help change that. So I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts about kind of social media person versus community, or, you know, how you're seeing those kind of intertwine in some ways.
Yeah. Let me take that back to like, I think a bigger principle at place. Like, so I think what I try to do with Fever Bee and the tiny team I have is be data-driven about our work. Like, I feel that's a unique thing. I think we invest a lot of time. I've got one person who just looks at data the entire day. You know, that's his full-time job. Pavel Hype. And everyone says that they're data-driven until they see data that they don't like. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't like that data, so I'm going to ignore it and go with what I thought anyway. So an example, like we worked with a client a year ago, and they wanted to build a community, not about themselves, but for their topic that they were in. So people could talk about that topic, which was human resources. And we did survey after we did surveys, so we did interview after interview with members, and what they're saying us is that we want a community to discuss the product. That's what we want. So we looked at that data, we presented it to the client, and they said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to build a community for people to discuss the topic, despite all the competition, despite all those things. And I think it's easy to be data-driven until you get data you don't want. And social media is a lot like that. This is where social media comes into it. Because for years, I began the blog in 2008, and I was always very clear. We don't do social media because that is an audience. That's not a community where people engage with each other. Social media is that you blast out a message and maybe people will react to it.
Yeah.
And then we began getting the data. And then when we do the interviews with members and surveys, I kept hearing so often, like, yes, I participate in a client's community on Facebook and Twitter and on their forums. And I was like, and it came up so often that it's very clear that the audience doesn't make that distinction that we do. And I'm also very worried that we're going to be like those people that used to sell ice when the refrigerators and the fridge freezers came along, where we just can find ourselves out of date because we had this like purest view of what community is. And so I'm quite mindful of that. And so I think community is what our audience thinks it is. And it's very hard to change what our audience thinks. And I think the reason why I feel we get some of the results for clients that we do is that we follow the data even when it tells us things that we don't like. And this is one of those situations where it makes far more sense to be like, okay, if they think of it as a community on social media and Twitter, how they engage with us and other channels, let's work with that. Let's work with that because that's what they want. I mean, let's find a way to work with the social media team or the marketing team. And also it's kind of weird when a member of the audience has a conversation in the community of one member of staff has a conversation with someone on like Twitter account, and there's no connection there. Like they'll feel a little bit aggrieved that, wait, you don't know who I am? I've made 5,000 posts in your community and you don't know who I am. And luckily there's tools and technologies like Orbit that are making that a lot easier. But yeah, I think social media should be let me say, I don't think it has to be part of our work, but I don't think that we should reject it because we have some purist notion of what community is.
Okay. That does make complete sense. And what was that technology you said?
Orbit. ORBIT.
Yeah.
It's quite cool. I was playing around with it this morning, actually. They bring like all of the discussions from elsewhere into one place. There's other tools that do it, but Orbit is.
I think that's the company I talked to that I was telling you about earlier. As a matter of fact.
Nice.
Yeah.
It works. It's easy.
That's good to know. So maybe I'll think about investing in something like that because it really would be interesting to see where customers are engaging, and how they engage in these different areas.
They're actually an example of a company that it just came out of nowhere, and you kind of hear about them, and also like now they have like a free trial, so I was trying that out, and yeah, it's simple. I kind of like it. I'm not an expert in using the tool yet, but I'm like, yeah, I kind of like it. There's some simplicity there. You can get interesting data out of it. Yeah,
you're a data guru, and I like that about you. No, but I think data sometimes is really hard to get. You made a couple of points. One is some people when you start looking at the data, they didn't like what they saw and they didn't want to go that direction. That's an interesting point. Maybe it's because they don't know how to deal with what they just saw. You know what I mean? When I think of, and probably to get off topic a little bit, but when I think of getting data out of my community today, and there's certain things that you can get out that are easy, whether it's inside the platform or whether it's on Google Analytics, but tying that data into real business outcomes and saying, these are the problems, that we're trying to solve. Here's how we're solving it. And here's all the data around that, and telling that story is sometimes very difficult to do. And it could be because of disparate systems. So for example, if you have a support community, case deflection is the typical thing you talk about, but you know what? It's one of the hardest, it's really hard to do, or it seems to be hard to do because one is if your systems aren't connected, and you're not, so when I say connection, it could be enterprise search. So is your search connected to your portal? Is your, on your community, is all those things connected? And then are you kind of looking at case deflection, hard case deflection? Then you got soft case deflection, looking at Google Analytics, how long are they staying on the page, what are they looking at, all that kind of stuff, and then tying it all back. Those things aren't easy to do because it takes one, investments, and then it takes two, is you have to have the people to be able to, kind of say, data, and not to get completely off, but that piece, just that piece is hard to do. You know what I mean? And maybe you've seen it and done it a lot. What would you say to that? Blunt and honest, because you've done this a lot.
When a government does like a major initiative, like in a community to reduce crime, they also know that they have to set aside some money to evaluate if it works or not. And you want to know, like, did your initiative succeed or fail? And they set aside like a small pot of money compared to the total range of the project to evaluate if it worked. The problem in community is that the community platforms aren't really designed to tell us the return on investment. In any real metric that matters, I think Chorus does okay. Which platform are you on? Chorus or
Higher Logic?
Higher Logic. Right.
Yeah.
So Chorus kind of does okay. But even that, I mean, I don't want to like dump on anyone, but like even that, there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah.
And the problem is that evaluation is hard and it takes time. I'll give you an example with Higher Logic. So there's a client on Higher Logic we're working with now. We just began work with them to measure the ROI of their community, such as what is the relationship between people that participate in a community and their retention rate, and whether they sign up for more courses or not. And it means we've got to combine data from Higher Logic, we've got to combine data from Salesforce, we've got to combine data from their course module as well, all into one place. And that takes time. And so for us, I'll be upfront about the numbers here. Like that was around 100 hours of work. So for us, that's immediately like a 15 to 20 grand project here. That's like, and that's not an insignificant amount of money. I get that. And so a lot of clients don't have that money, and like we can do it, we can really show the impact, but there's also a downside here. Like the results might not tell you what you want to hear, and the idea that you like, and that's a challenge as well. Like we've done the studies before where we do the study, we present the results, and the client's kind of like,
I'm not telling my CEO that.
Results.
Yeah,
there's one client a year and a half ago who we worked with on the ROI. And then they came back and said that the ROI was so high, it was unbelievable. And they asked us to tone it down. And it's absolutely nuts to change the methodology to hit a target. That makes no sense. If you have an issue with the methodology, you do it while you're discussing the methodology. But like, that's the challenge at the moment, is that we don't take the evaluation seriously at all. And because we don't, we never get the data we need to prove the value of the work we do in a conclusive way. And there's been a lot of, like we did a project 2 years ago where we took a community down almost for a couple of months.
Yes, that was excellent, by the way. Sorry. Yep.
Thanks. And like, there's a Harvard business case review on that if you want to share at some point. But like, that is definitive. That is absolutely 100% definitive proof. But you need nerves of steel, and you need to be able to honestly afford the fee of us or people like us to be able to get those results. So it comes down to money, and we're so excited about getting a community up and running that we don't ever set aside a pot of money to see if it works. And we really should, because also like we don't just tell you, like any data person doesn't just tell you whether your community generated ROI. They can tell you specifically. There's a leveling off period in most communities where the relationship between purchases or retention rates are kind of like steady for a while. They're going up, and then they level off. Knowing where that point is important, because then then you can design a whole onboarding system specifically for that. So once you get to this point, that's the level where you need to get a member to. More than that, then the value doesn't increase. And so once you have all this data in one data set, it becomes so much easier to draw out interesting conclusions from it. And platforms don't do this. So I think because it's not really in their business model, they want you to look at the level of engagement and stuff, but also because it's so much work. Like the Higher Logic project, for example, we've got to pull that data and then we have to clean it, not just from Higher Logic, from other platforms as well, because every data set is different. Some people don't always use the same names. You have duplicate names in there. Some people forget their password and they create a second account and third account.
Right.
And all of a sudden it becomes like, that's where the work is. That's why I don't think a platform vendor is ever going to be able to do this well, because the intricacies of each different company's system or where they track customers and all that just makes it so difficult. So it's an individual, it's a custom lift, but you've got to set aside the money if you want the results.
No, that's a good point. And I've been pushing, and I try to push not just Higher Logic, but other platforms into innovating a little bit. If they're not going to be able to come up with kind of the data that you're talking about, then give us ways to make that easy to get that data, whether it's APIs or I don't know, whatever it is. You have to be able to connect to those business systems to make that happen. And I believe, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but when I look at the innovative things that are going on in the platform space, I'm not really seeing it. Like I just see the basic shit. It's just, forums, blogs, those kinds of things. And I'm like, what can we do to kind of help, the way, like engagement. One of the hardest things, and I know I'm getting off a little bit, but, is engagement, and creating that whole customer journey and all these other things. Why can't, these platforms make that super easy for us to do, have templates, have whatever, say, this is how you go do it, and just the basic shit, like people like videos or, quick hit videos or whatever. I don't know. Like, can you build that into the platform that makes it easy to kind of do some of that? Maybe you add some social type things to some of these. Look, I mean, probably a B2B community like mine is probably not going to get on there and do these weird dances and stuff like that on, on the platform. But I mean, still video, I don't know, integrating anything that is engaging and easy to do and that kind of stuff. I think that platforms can do a better job in that. That's just my spiel on that, and if I really, and I'm sure you have some thoughts and maybe even know who's kind of up and coming, in that area. I don't know.
Yeah. I think a major innovation in this space would be so disruptive that no one wants to disrupt themselves. And I think that's probably a part of it. And it's like, that's not an unfamiliar story. I think it's very different. And it's always easier to talk about this from like the outside, like it's a lot easier to talk about it certainly. So I think platform vendors, it feels like the products they're offering are all kind of the same at this point. There's some differences. Like Salesforce obviously has a completely different structure to some of the other communities. And now they're trying to compete on services and integration with social media and other channels, and with High Logic automation, with it's inside it's customer success. So they've all found this kind of like little niche that they're kind of pursuing, but the product, there's small differences between them, but it's not huge. They're competing on services and everything around the product itself because I don't think they can do more. And the problem, I think, is that if you don't, I think a lot of people that purchase a community platform are doing it for the first time, and they don't really know the difference between a forum and a good forum. They don't know the difference between gamification, good gamification, and then fantastic gamification. The nuances have a huge impact, but it's hard to know that unless you're in the space. And I wish we could do more projects of helping clients pick the right platform. But again, people don't want to pay for that because, it's just not something that they want to go too deep in. But the nuances really matter. And I think the innovation is happening, social media, I think a lot of the innovation comes from social media. Stack Overflow does a lot of interesting stuff. I like what they do. A lot of really interesting stuff. Reddit also doing some interesting stuff. I don't know why it's not easy for every member to have like a live blog or a live stream. Like that feels like something's happening, but I don't know why we don't have short video clips that are easy to post up, or at least integration where we can bring that content into a community from social media.
It's like you think about Canva, for example. It's a place where you can just create a bunch of cool stuff, and then how awesome would it be if it just kind of pushed into the, I don't know, it just things sort of like that, it just making things easier.
Yeah, there's one platform a while back that did this big announcement that they're now offering groups, like subgroups. I'm like, I remember that from like 10 years ago. And Again, I'm sure it's easy to look at my site and be like, oh, you should be better than this, this, and this. It's always easy from the outside. I just don't feel. I feel the space is ripe for disruption, and I don't feel that they're keeping up with best practices and how people want to engage with each other. And if you look to what the social media technologies are doing, with all the research and experience they have, I'd be looking at them and thinking like, which of these are critical to bring in? Yeah.
That's why you're on, because you have the words that I wanted to say is that's exactly right, man. Is it's ripe for disruption. But you are seeing, like, for example, Higher Logic buying Vanilla Forums and Gainsight buying Incited. And so we're not seeing disruption, but we are seeing, some acquisitions and some changes. And I know Kuros bought some social media companies a year or two ago, and so data company kind of stuff, what that looks like in the future, I don't know, but it will be interesting to see for sure. So,
well, here's the problem I have. Like, I wish all these companies the best of luck. It's great when people can sell out and, get the rewards from that. But generally speaking, like, acquisitions aren't a sign of innovation. They're often the opposite, where you're fighting for market share by trying to acquire, cut costs. And that might not be the case of what's happening here. And also in the startup space with Gainsight, that might be different. But I'm concerned. I mean, I want as much diversity as possible. I want as many, like, the ideal situation for all of us is that there's lots of companies all fighting and innovating with each other to offer something new and unique. And I don't think we have that. And I think the fewer companies we have, the less innovation we're going to have.
Such a good point.
As much as I love all of the platform companies that are out there.
Well, Rich, I really appreciate you coming on today, and certainly
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I was just happy you said yes. So, well, thank you everyone for another Peers Over Beers. I'm Chris Detzel, and Rich, thank you so much for coming from Fever Bee.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.